Seconds always gets a bit late. So thanks to our sponsors actually, 6pivot for the amazing burgers and whatnot, and Telstra Purple for the venue, it's great. And I'll also talk about our little friends at JetBrains in a minute as well. So thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be speaking about Blazor. It's sort of an introductory level talk, so you don't have to be a technology person to understand this. It's more for decision makers as well. But even if you think you're here to talk about jackets, that's cool. But if you're a seasoned web developer, I hope I have something for you to learn as well. I've set up a Q&A platform, Slido. So if we just jump to that. So if you grab your phone out and scan that, what I'm going to do is have a poll. Sorry about the blurriness, I'm tethering my phone, but it should come good in a sec. But you can upvote questions. So if you put questions in the Q&A in there, and then get your friends to upvote it, you may win a JetBrains product voucher. Or if there's just a great question, also vote for it, but get your friends onto it too. If you go to, that's not loading for some reason. If you go to, there we go, slido.com, if you can't scan the QR, and just put in the Blazor, one word, is the code there. If anyone needs me to come back to that, just let me know. I'll just give you a second. So my name is, apologies for the blurriness. My name is Andrew Newton, or also known as Newt, because there's lots of Andrews in my life. And I'm a senior consultant at 6pivot. It's a slow reveal. I started playing around with web content in the mid-90s, and I remember my family paying money for a browser called Netscape Navigator Gold, back when you had to pay for browsers. I'm sure it'll come good. Let's just tell Miro to do good things. Maybe I'll refresh it. Let's give that a go. I jumped on Blazor quite early. There's a beta came out of Blazor WebAssembly, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And I'll speak more about that later if that doesn't make sense to you. I actually have a product myself in production with paying customers that is on Blazor, and I like to just maintain that as a bit of a hobby to, just to make sure I keep on top of the latest tech. And Miro's going to die on me. That's cool. Why is that not working? Sorry, guys. We did try to get the Wi-Fi is working. It says I've got 4G. It should be working, hey. Yeah, I can give it a go. Yeah, if you give me that. Anyway, I'll just keep speaking. So if you want to find yours and connect, that'd be awesome. Thanks, Shaw. Back in to understand what Blazor is and why we care about it, or maybe we don't, that's not, the point of today is not for me to sell you Blazor, it's just to tell you about it. If you're a decision maker, go, should we be looking into it or not? Make sure the password's not showing because you're on the big screen. So we have to go back to the early days of the internet. And if you remember, if you've seen what's the Wayback engine or whatever that has all web pages, all these web pages is horrid with the Times New Roman text, and they didn't really have much on them, just a bunch of text and links and whatnot. And that was built with HTML and then CSS, and that was great. It's like web content, like what Shaw was showing. A little bit of interactivity, but really just in the way of navigating. Then some forms started to be generated, and people were like, oh, this is cool. We can enter some information, submit some forms, that's great. But it wasn't really until JavaScript came along. So in 1997, Netscape submitted a standard to ECMA International, and it was called ECMAScript. And so from June 1997, the ECMAScript standard was born. And then that allowed browsers to be interactive. They could hide and show content. We could make it look visually appealing, and all these sorts of things. So, the problem with ECMAScript, or it's not necessarily a problem, but the downsides, I guess, it is an interpreted language, and so it could be relatively slow compared to other languages. It also, the way it came about through such an open mechanism, it had a lot of weird quirks in the early days, if those remember IE6 development versus, whatnot. So there wasn't a great, it's kind of the way it evolved, it wasn't really set up for success. And so to overcome those limitations, there was a lot of technologies which you've probably all heard of, such as Flash, Java applets, and the dreaded Silverlight. And these allowed running compiled code in the browser. So the plugins offered better performance and richer features, but what you sacrificed was security risks, compatibility issues, dependencies. So WebAssembly is a more modern tech. WebAssembly, also known as WASM, W-A-S-M if I say that. It's a newer standard that aims to sort of solve those problems. So we can get the browser to execute code at near native speed. Thanks. I think it's coming good. We'll just get forward to some slides anyway. It's not, so the key thing I want to get across today too is WASM's not there to necessarily replace JavaScript. It's actually there to complement it. So you can use both. And I'll go into that more. So that's what I was talking about, the old websites. I'm just going to skip some slides. Yeah, all right. So WebAssembly is, it's not talked about a whole lot, but it is supported in all recent versions of all the major browsers. So if you look on Can I Use, I think 94% of the internet, roughly, can support it. Yeah, and Blazor is an interesting framework in that there's two modes it will run in, and I'll go into that in a second. But it either uses WebAssembly to run C# or other languages code in the browser. And it allows you to sort of use the same tools that you might for desktop or server applications if you're a .NET developer. So with the two hosting modes, Blazor WebAssembly, which is this one, it runs the entire application on the client side. Whereas server is actually running essentially entirely on the server, and UI updates are done through WebSockets using SignalR. And this has caused a lot of confusion in the community, and I think probably the main reason Blazor doesn't have great uptake, to be honest, because if you went in the early days and Googled Blazor stuff, you're getting examples for Blazor server when you're actually looking for WebAssembly, and it wasn't really well understood. So I'll keep coming back to this because I feel like it's becoming a solved problem soon. But essentially, the pros and cons at a high level. So WebAssembly is ideal for, say, public websites. So you might have a large number of users doing maybe some client-side processing. You want it to be quite fast. But the download size could be quite large. You might have a couple of meg download before the user can even use your app, your loading indicator. Blazor server, however, is ideal if you need to support older browsers. Anything that supports WebSockets, it'll work. But it does have a scalability issue for a large number of users because generally WebSockets is not a very scalable technology in terms of every client that connects now has a two-way connection to the server. So they both have their pros and cons. They both exist for good reason, but I think it's probably unfortunate that it was packaged that way because it's quite confusing to a lot of people. But again, if there's any questions, throw them in Slido as well, because there might be still some confusion going forward. We'll see. So I'm going to talk about some advantages, disadvantages, and also some complementary and alternate technologies. Again, I'm not here to sell Blazor, so I'm very happy to talk about there's some other technologies that maybe have similar pros and cons. And I won't spend too long on it because it's a .NET meetup, but let's just dive into it. So if you're using .NET for the front end and back end, and you're building a new app and maybe you don't have JavaScript developers, then Blazor's probably a really good fit if you need to build a web app. You're going to be able to use the same tools, less context switching. So as web developers, generally, we'll have to deal with HTML, CSS, back-end technologies such as SQL, NoSQL, potentially other things like message buses. Using a different language on the front end and back end is just another context switch that ideally we would do without. Performance is an interesting one. So I'm not going to claim it's faster, but in theory, WebAssembly code will execute faster than the equivalent JavaScript code in theory. Again, talking about download sizes and whatever, that might not be true for every application, but technically it's faster. So again, around productivity, just sort of, if you're a .NET developer, again, you've already got NuGet. If you go to use React, Vue, whatever, you're now going to use NPM. And it's just a different suite of technologies, whereas if you can get away with using Blazor, there's less to learn in that ecosystem. same around sort of consistency. So Blazor's not like some revolutionary new framework that's breaking new ground. It's using similar concepts to other frameworks, like we have components, we have routing, validation, authentication. It just so happens if you're a .NET developer and you've built, say, a Razor Pages application, your code's going to be almost identical to achieve those same things. It's also sort of flexible, which I'll talk about later. And actually, sorry, coming back to that. Just around sort of compatibility, you don't have to just build a WebAssembly app or a JavaScript app. They can quite happily live together. So if you have a React app or a Vue app or whatever, and you go, hey, there's this niche use case where we want to build some WebAssembly component and embed it in our existing app, you can absolutely do that. Doesn't even have to be with Blazor, just any WebAssembly. Or similarly, if you have a WebAssembly app, you're running Blazor, you've built your whole app, and you're like, oh, there's this cool like calendar control that no one's built yet. You can just wrap the JavaScript component. You'll lose the performance benefits, but it works. So you're not kind of locking yourself away from JavaScript components. Just to touch on security too, actually. So WebAssembly runs in a sandbox environment, which prevents it from accessing the host system memory or the browser. So the risk of malicious code or memory corruption errors is reduced. But obviously, security is a complex topic, so it's not like it's some silver bullet. You obviously have to do your own assessment, but you may find it helps reduce some risk if you have a highly secure application. So some of the drawbacks around maturity, obviously, it hasn't been around as long. So the community is not as big. If you're trying to find help, so support and skills, it's probably not going to be there as much as other frameworks. Compatibility, again, is a pro and con. So if you're using server, then it's very compatible. But if you're using WebAssembly, it's not. So because you have to make that choice, I guess, at the moment, you may see it as a pro or a con. And there's obviously trade-offs when you're choosing those technologies. You go, oh, I built my app in Blazor server, now I want to add some WebAssembly stuff. Right today, that's not great, but again, in the future, that's going to improve. And I won't spend too long here because it's a .NET meetup, but some complementary technologies to look into. So with Maui, which is the other new tech coming out from .NET, essentially replacing Xamarin Forms and WPF, you can build native apps, and there's great integration with Blazor. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can either build your whole, sort of like the old Cordova PhoneGap thing. You can build a web app and put it in a native shell, and it will actually run the WebAssembly natively. So it's faster than that old mechanism where it's running a JavaScript app. Or you can build, say, using XAML, your app, but similar to what I said before about maybe there's a cool calendar control in Blazor that doesn't exist in XAML, you can actually embed a Blazor component in your Maui app. Another cool tech to look at is WebGL, sort of in the same vein as WebAssembly. It's quite new, but if you're building like a game or some fancy graphics thing that you want to use the local video card for, you can embed that in your WebAssembly app, much like you can your JavaScript app. So if we're just jumping into where a bit more. So obviously, I've mentioned it works in all the major browsers. You can also easily build progressive web apps with it, where essentially downloads the app to your device, which gives it better performance, offline mode, all this sort of stuff out of the box. You can also run, as I mentioned, Blazor server in fairly old browsers if you need to. In the mobile scenario, we talked about Maui. There's another tech I didn't mention before, Uno, which is another sort of alternate if you do want to do that and you're not happy with Blazor. And then there's also containers and edge devices. So this is more WebAssembly in general, not just Blazor, but you can run WebAssembly apps in like IoT devices with Azure IoT Edge or in Docker containers. And that kind of leads me into another interesting topic. So I want to talk about WASI, which is the WebAssembly System Interface. And I'm just going to quote here Solomon Hykes, who's one of the Docker co-founders. If WASM plus WASI existed in 2008, we wouldn't have needed to create Docker. That's how important it is. WebAssembly on the server is the future of computing. Standardized system interface was the missing link. So it's quite interesting that, so WASI is an abstraction of the underlying system, but it's very widely compatible across a vast range of systems. So imagine if Microsoft and Apple got together today, and instead of building two different operating systems, they went, well, what's common between them? Let's just create a standard. That's kind of roughly what I'm talking about. And this kind of opens up possibilities for efficiency in our profession that we don't have right now. So it opens up the opportunity to have a common package manager. So how many times have we seen, say, a useful JavaScript library ported from, Python, or vice versa, or some Java thing ported to C#? And each time someone ports the code over, it's got the same bugs the old one had, plus some new bugs because they ported it wrong. And it just seems like a big waste of manpower and whatever in our industry. So there's now things, one's called WASMA. It's a package manager for WASM components. And so what it's trying to let people do is say, hey, build your component in your language of choice. Let's say it's Python. Let's compile that down to WebAssembly. I'm now building, let's say, a Rust app in WebAssembly. I can just pull your component in. It's compiled. I'm not pulling in the code. I'm pulling in the compiled component. And that should then run on any WASI compliant device. Could be a little IoT device, could be a fridge, could be a full-blown web app. So that's sort of an interesting tech to keep an eye on. It's maturing quite quickly. I'm not saying it's ready today for the big time, but just keep an eye on it. Yeah, so let's just talk about when, which is the final bit. So Blazor has been around for quite a while, in production since 2019, but it's still evolving, and with each release of .NET, it kind of gets better and better. But I actually think this next release in .NET 8 coming in November, it's going to make it kind of ready for the prime time, and I'll talk about why soon. So we've talked about the confusion between sort of WebAssembly, Blazor server. There's still a place for building WASM-only apps. Like if you want to deploy your app to a static site, you don't want to pay for a server, then a WASM app is great. Similarly with server, I guess, if you just got some internal intranet app, you don't really care about scalability, you just want to quickly build it, then you might still build a Blazor server app. But coming in the next version of .NET, there's this new template called Blazor Web App. And basically, to dive into how that works, I've borrowed this great diagram, which is credited down here. The first time a user visits your URL, it'll take some time to download the WebAssembly code. Could be a few megabytes, whatever. And so what happens is a request can go back with the initial version of the page, and it opens a WebSocket connection, which is quite fast. That's how Blazor Server works now. The user probably won't even notice that happen. And what that means is they can just click a button, do whatever, and it's working. But it's working kind of in server mode, where, okay, I click a button, let's use the old increment counter. It sends a message back to the server. It says, oh, they incremented the counter. Here's a new version of that part of the DOM. Just render that for me. So that's the server telling the client via WebSockets. As soon as it detects that the WebAssembly code is downloaded, it can then switch to WASM mode. And now when I click that button, it's not going to make a request to the server. It's literally going to increment in the WebAssembly version. Seems quite complicated, but it's quite amazing. They've been talking about it for a while, and I've had to play with it. It works quite well. There's going to be some considerations, like if I'm on the server, I might have direct access to the database, whereas if I'm in WASM, I don't. I've got to make an API call. But using things like IOC containers, you can get around that. I've had to play with it. It works quite well. But yeah, I'm not saying it's some silver bullet, but it's good to have that flexibility. And just sort of think about why we might want to do that, and so why I think Blazor is kind of ready now, because it's more flexible. So if we want to talk about sort of that scalability, before we had to choose server or client WebAssembly, we can now kind of get both and configure even down to the component level or the page level where you want that thing to render based on your use case. And that might be important for search engine optimization, for example. So server-side rendering, no matter which framework you're using, this is the same with, say, a React app. You might want to use something like Next.js to get server-side rendering. It's quite important for search engine optimization, because when a web crawler hits your page, it doesn't wait around for all the JavaScript to load to get the content. It just gets whatever it gets given in that first request, and it moves on. And so if your first HTML page has script, blah, 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 and nothing else, Google's going to go, well, I don't know what that is. I'm out of here. So with server-side rendering, that first request comes back with HTML, well-formed, title, whatever content you choose is rendered on that first render. And then if there's fancy widgets that need to load later that you don't care about for search engine optimization, you can just let them load later. There's another thing called streaming rendering. And this one's a bit more interesting. This is sort of for a scenario where maybe that first render, you don't actually care if the whole thing's rendered straight away. You want something to go back to the client straight away, but maybe that something is a loading indicator while something else takes 3 seconds on the server to load. So this is actually streaming the response back to the browser. So this is not WebSockets, it's just that initial request is now streamed. So you can achieve sort of more with that as well. And you can use them in parallel, I guess. Some other sort of reasons this is important is a lot of people back when WebAssembly sort of came out went, oh, you know, my Google search ranking's gone down, whatever, if I build a WebAssembly app, because they have these metrics like interaction to next paint. And so what that is, it measures how long between a user doing something, say interacting, between when the next render cycle happens. And in WebAssembly, obviously that can be interesting on the first render because the Google bot's trying to click something and nothing's happening or whatever. But there's another, whereas with the server mode that works straight away, the WebSocket setup. But there's another one now which is first input delay, which is more that, from the time it detects an input to when it can focus on the input. So it's just another thing which, again, I'm not saying that Blazor solves this problem, but it gives you the flexibility, if that's a problem for you, to tweak things and go, oh, I want that to render client only or server only or both. So it just has that flexibility now where you can't really say, oh, I can't build a Blazor app because of these. Another cool thing coming is the smaller app size. So a lot of the other .NET 8 stuff is around this as well, where the actual compiled WebAssembly DLLs that have to get downloaded can be trimmed right down with ahead of time compilation. So at the end of the day, all that means is, oh, we had a Blazor app in .NET 7 and it was 3 megs. It's now 200K or whatever, but it still functions. So yeah, I personally enjoy using Blazor. I feel like I'm far more productive when I write code. For example, validation logic is a common thing where, oh, let's use the .NET validation attributes. You can literally use that in a shared project and reference it from your client and your server, and your validation is identical on both projects without doing anything. Similarly with sort of like mapping. So how many times have you sort of had a .NET API and then you go to, oh, we're going to generate TypeScript types and map it to JavaScript? That just doesn't even exist. You just literally reference the same object on the client and the server. And that's the kind of stuff where when I'm developing, I'm like, oh, this just kind of makes sense. Like, why were we doing it any other way? But yeah, so let me check the questions. And did anyone fill in the poll? Oh, cool, look at that. Oh, that's a, so the first poll showed that 57% of people are already using Blazor. So sorry about that. Hopefully you love it even more than you loved it before. If we just run the other poll now, so after hearing all that, has anyone's opinions changed? Maybe you've gone the other way. Maybe I didn't do a great job of selling it. But yeah, have we got that? And while you're doing that, I'll look at the Q&A. Has everyone been upvoting? Oh, there's 2 on 5. Does anyone want to upvote one so I can give away a prize? Come on, come on. Come on, someone bribe someone. All right, I'll just keep talking and people can keep upvoting then. So does Blazor United change any of this talk? So I think that's, Blazor United was the name for this thing here, I believe, unless anyone wants to correct me. So Blazor United was what started this concept of having server and WebAssembly in one. Interestingly, there was a way to do it before in .NET 7, and I actually have this running on my production Blazor web app, and I'm just going to have to rewrite the whole thing, I think. You could actually set up a Blazor server app, and then there's instructions on the Microsoft Docs for how to get server-side rendering with your WebAssembly app. And it's literally like, create a server app, create a client app, copy these files from here to here. And I was doing this going, this feels wrong. It's like, I know it's going to work, but it just feels wrong, because it's in the official docs, so it has to work, right? So yeah, I believe that's what Blazor United was. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Oh, look, we got more votes on this one. Sorry, Blazor United question. Good question though. Oh, that's yours as well. Luke P, guaranteed. All right, have you tried Blazor Server, unless it's two Luke Ps. Have you tried Blazor Server at scale with Azure Sigma? No, I personally haven't. I've only ever played with Blazor Server in, well, that's not true. My production app is now Blazor Server, but only for the initial requests. And then I don't actually use Sigma with that because I don't do anything with it. It just kind of lets me render the first version of the page without waiting. But yeah, I think you could definitely scale it, right? Like 100%, especially with cloud services. I guess where I say it's a disadvantage, I'm talking about the cost. Like 100 users, probably free, 1,000, great. What if you're like 1 million users, 2 million users? Like I don't know how much that's going to cost you. Every time someone clicks a button, that's a WebSocket connection. Versus WebAssembly, it's download once. They can click 1 million buttons, depending on what your app's doing. It's not going to kind of... So when I'm talking about scalability, and I guess I'm talking about cost there, as opposed to performance. You would get it to scale and perform, that's fine. Does that sort of answer the question? But I haven't done that at scale, no. I mostly play with WebAssembly. But yeah, Luke P can grab your prize. If you don't want it, you can give it to someone else. Is Luke P here or remote? Ah, there you go. Cool, good questions. Awesome. If anyone has to go, go. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer more questions. What else we got here? How's experience for rich and complex UIs with pagination, sorting, filtering? Yes, so there are things like, I think Microsoft have an official data grid. It's pretty featureless. There's lots of other things like there's one called Blazor, which lets you, like component libraries is what I'm getting at. So they have lots of components and they do have great grids and stuff. When you say as good as, say, React, it probably comes to that maturity question. Like if you're thinking of like AG grid, which has been around for, I don't know, a decade or more and is ported to every JavaScript framework, it's probably not going to have all those features, but it may not need them either. I don't know. Like it depends what it can do. I know that one has things like export to Excel, and so yeah, there's definitely component libraries and you should check them out. Probably a good one if you're just mucking around is Blazor. Seems to be one of the more like just free open source but quite feature rich ones, so have a play with that. Blazor is good if you have what is it? It lets you support different design systems, so Material, Ant Design, a couple of others, Bootstrap. And then there's other ones like Telerik and whatnot. So yeah, there's quite good libraries out there, but some of them you have to pay for. So does that answer that? It's basically a maturity question, right? Like there's lots of components and they're great, but they're probably not going to be as feature rich. But if you don't need all that, that's cool. Is JavaScript finally losing its iron grip over the web? I don't know. I'll let you guys answer that. I don't know. I don't hate JavaScript. I'm not here to bash on it. I probably love TypeScript more, but I think TypeScript helped JavaScript along. But yeah, I don't know. As I said, for me, it's more developer experience than anything. So context switching, there's enough to think about with complex requirements and just writing boilerplate code that I don't honestly care about. I just care about solving problems. So if I'm there like copying and pasting mapping code and whatever, I'm probably not happy. So I don't know, we'll leave that one for the community to answer. It's good that there's alternatives though, because even for Rust or Go developers who maybe haven't done web development, there's really great sort of WASM frameworks around those now. So it's really cool. Okay, when building a PWA, can you get away with not writing any JavaScript to do the caching? I think so. The only PWA I built was for a hackathon like 2 or 3 years ago, so it was quite early. I don't think I had to write any JavaScript. Maybe I did. Again, sorry, I don't have recent experience with that. But I'm pretty sure there's like boilerplate templates where you can go generate a Blazor WASM PWA, and it just works. So I don't think you have to write any JavaScript. Someone's probably written some for you. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the answer, but sorry, I'm not 100% sure. That'd be interesting for people. So like local storage?
Can you
Or
write that in C sharp?
yeah.
That bit where you're caching it as part of the PWA?
Yeah. So you can interact with local storage and all those things. If whatever you want, or was it local DB, whatever they call that browser database. Yeah. Yep. All that works. Yeah. And if there's not a native Blazor component to do it, there'll be a JavaScript wrapped one. So you will be writing C sharp. Under the hood, it may or may not be actually executing JavaScript. Yeah. Yeah, so that answers that. Yeah, I have wrapped a JavaScript component. It's not too difficult. You kind of just figure out which methods and properties you want to expose and just write a bit of code. It's not too hard. But a lot of them are out there on NuGet, so you can generally find what you need. State management. That's a good question. That's one of the topics of the more advanced talk I'm going to be giving. So yeah, I do have plans for a more advanced talk around state management. What did I have on it? Testing is another interesting thing. So there's different ways to test. Oh, and data binding. There's like 4 to 6 different ways to data bind in Blazor, which is interesting. But yeah, pros and cons of each. So state management, just as general, you can just use local variables in your class, whatever. You can use things like local storage and whatnot in the browser. You can implement your own like singleton class. So while you're in that WASM app, it's just like a singleton, it's just in memory, but your whole app can access it. Then there is the state management libraries, such as, what's the one called? It's Fluxor, I think. I can't remember how many X's that is, but it's essentially similar to Redux. It even works with the Redux dev tools. You'll notice I think I have the Redux dev tools installed here, because yeah, my personal app uses that. So that's kind of like a global state management where you can dispatch actions and then state updates based on that. So you can feel very much like you're taking the benefits of, say, that React way of developing, where it's like one-way information flow. You can do that in Blazor. It's up to you. But you could also go, I love Angular and I want to do two-way data binding and manage state that way. You can do that as well. That's a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's so flexible that you'll probably end up where some projects have a bit of a mess of both, which is, yeah, again, I'll speak about that more in future, maybe at this forum if anyone's interested. Yeah, so lots of options for state management. And I think that's a really good question, because when you're building a new Blazor app, that's the kind of stuff that's not out there on the internet in a really nice way. Like, here's the best ways to manage state in a Blazor app. There's a lot of sort of mishmash of info out there. So that's a cool question. Yes, it is, Turtle. It's too hot to wear blazers in Queensland. That's why we don't wear them, we just build our web apps with them. Which Blazor is more popular, server or WebAssembly? It's an interesting question. Like, I've heard a lot of people use server for like prototypes or intranet apps. They just go, oh, I don't even need to learn any web technology apart from a bit of HTML, and I can build a web app. But definitely for like the more, I don't know, I think there's some like video site where you can rate videos and stuff that's scaled to millions of people. That's definitely a WebAssembly one. So it probably depends on the use case. That's in my experience, though, that's how I've seen it. Kind of people who play with it kind of just go server, just to see what it's like. But if you're going to build a production app, you definitely need to make that decision, or wait for .NET 8, and then you get both. Yeah, and then that one. I'm hoping I've answered that. Is it more expensive to run Blazor server? Like, technically, yes, by default, just because you need a web server, right, to host it. Whereas a WASM app, you can just host it on a static site, which is traditionally a lot cheaper. So that's the main reason, plus then the web sockets and whatever on top of it.
And is the server rendered WASM 1 kind of in between costs?
Yeah, so, oh, sorry, is the new one that's in between kind of the in-between costs? Like, it gives you the flexibility. So on my site that I run, I have like news articles, let's say, and some information like testimonials. And I get that stuff to render when you request the URL. But then I've got this other stuff like tools and calculators and whatever. And that stuff, like, the information is not useful to a web crawler, but it's useful to a user. So it's like, here's my news articles, and here's a bunch of loading indicators. And then the user's like, oh, cool, there's some information, Google's happy. And then when those are ready to work with, they can. So it just lets you have that flexibility to choose. But yeah, you could definitely host it where, and I've seen a lot of people do this with like Next and React. It's just that very first request, you just want a page to show. You don't want a loading indicator. That's kind of like the cheapest way to get both, I guess. You don't even need WebSockets for that. You can just say render the page, and then you'll kind of have, until your WebAssembly is loaded, you'll kind of have no interactivity. But some people are happy with that, which is kind of what I've got in my production app now. There's no WebSockets. It's just, yeah, just rendered and then loading indicators. Online course. Oh, okay, yeah, so Pluralsight seems outdated. Yeah, I haven't looked on Pluralsight recently, but it was definitely outdated back when I looked. Same goes for Udemy and YouTube bits and pieces. I think I've kind of just honestly just learnt myself for the most part. Okay, so that was .NET Rocks has good videos.
Carl Franklin, the guy.
Carl Franklin.
.NET Rocks.
Yep.
Podcast. He runs
He's
a fairly comprehensive set of YouTube videos called Blazor Train.
Blazor Train. There you go. Oh yeah, I think I've heard of that one. Oh yeah, I watched some of the early ones of that. Yes, yes, that looks quite good too. But yeah, there is this Blazor University as well, which I've referenced a little bit. Yeah, but you're right. This is the problem with the maturity, right? So if you're trying to sell this to your organization, going, we should jump on Blazor, but you have no skills in it whatsoever, that's going to be a question that comes up, I would hope, from your management, like how are we going to learn it? What are we going to do? Yeah, so have a look into it, but obviously there are consultants such as us and probably Purple and whoever who probably have some Blazor expertise as well who can help out. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. So, a big thank you to our main sponsor tonight, Six Pivot. We really appreciate your speakers, your knowledge, your food, and drinks. Also, another big thank you to Telstra Purple for letting us use this room. It's every month we get to come in here and make use of the space, and it's always very, very appreciated. And also to JetBrains for providing us with the speaker gifts that they then give out, because they all have JetBrains subscriptions anyway. Once again, we are always on the first Thursday of every month, so we look forward to seeing you all come back. We are always looking for sponsors and speakers, so if your company feels like they want to sponsor, we'll let you get up and spruik yourselves a little bit and do a little bit of a spiel if you want. Even better if your company has speakers who want to get up and speak as well. So we're always looking for speakers and sponsors. We're a pretty welcoming group here. We're happy to go through and discuss with you what you might want to talk about as well. You don't have to have a fully prepared talk straight away. Come and have a chat to us early and we can have a chat about it.